Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Marvel Midnight Suns. I played it on PS5, it's available on everything else. Okay, so let's get into the story. Hydra is doing evil Hydra stuff, and they end up resurrecting Lilith, who is, an evil demon witch. That goes really well for them, and they get possessed, and she starts, bringing hell to Earth, essentially. So you, the Hunter, yeah, that's their name, as well as a group of Marvel superheroes, have to stop the apocalypse from happening. And the story itself is good, I did enjoy it, but what I really enjoyed far more is the writing in this game. All the heroes come together at a place called the Abbey, and you get to develop friendships and talk with other heroes, and I just really love the dialogue in between them. When you're just walking through the Abbey, you can hear other characters not necessarily addressing you, but talking to each other, and the dialogue between them is great. Sometimes it's hilarious, sometimes it's serious, it's just really well done. I also love other fun little writing elements, like the Borderlands-esque character introduction cards. I thought those were really funny. Now let's get into the audio, and I think the voiceover work is good. I don't think it's all perfect. I think a few of the heroes, they could have better voice actors. They could do a better job bringing them to life. They just didn't feel quite right. And the voice actor for the Hunter is a little stilted at times, but it does kind of make sense at the same time because of story reasons. Specifically, the Hunter was dead and brought back to life, so they don't really understand modern talking. As for the sound effects, this game has really poor audio balance on the sound effects. I had to turn those down. They get really crazy loud to the point where it's just too much. But I do like the sound effects. I think they work well throughout the world, although I did run into a few missing ones. And then there's the music, which totally works. It does, but it is also utterly forgettable. I don't have any songs from it that are stuck in my brain. They're great background music that you will forget immediately. It's not going to stick with you. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot. This is a turn-based strategy game with card battling and RPG. When you are in combat, it is a turn-based strategy game, but all of your attacks, your skills, your special attacks, all of those are controlled by the cards in your hand. And fortunately, those cards do replenish, so if you burn through all 8 of your character's cards, you can, redo them. They will come back around. At the same time, you do level up during combat, and leveling up mostly affects your health. It affects a lot of your other stats, but your core attack damage and whatnot are determined by the cards you have in your deck, which you can upgrade through a variety of things. There's a lot going on in this game, honestly. As I mentioned in the story part, you build friendships with characters. That's a gameplay element. The higher your friendship level is with a character, the more useful they are in combat. The more you use a character in combat, the more cards you get for them, so you can build a better deck. There are also multiple forms of currency, some for buying cosmetic gear, some for buying things to help build friendships, to help upgrade cars, just a lot of stuff going on. And it's actually surprisingly easy to manage all of that stuff, although I will say I wish I had a little more access to some of those resources. But as I mentioned, all the heroes are in the Abbey. The Abbey acts as like the hub world, and from there you go to a table and pick your missions. And there are plenty of side missions, which I enjoyed. But then in the Abbey, there's a ton of other stuff going on beyond the friendships, just all sorts of side stuff. There's a ton of exploration, finding, treasure chests, and just all sorts of other things going on that I really enjoyed. It was a huge distraction, but a very welcome one. As for the combat, I will say there were times where it was a little frustrating because you wouldn't always get the cards you need, and you're sitting there trying to redraw cards, and it got frustrating. There was definitely some challenge there created by that, but never was the challenge so bad that I was just losing my mind. But I really enjoyed the combat system. I just enjoyed everything they did from a gameplay standpoint. I really enjoyed it. I think Firaxis really nailed it, quite frankly. Also, it has New Game Plus, so that's an immediate bonus. While New Game Plus is super dope, I do have one complaint with the combat, and that is the enemy turns. I wish there was a way to kind of fast forward those so that you could still see what they were doing, but at a faster speed, because there are enemies who can kind of multiply, and watching like 8 of those dudes create copies of themselves, oh my god, it gets old. Now let's get into the controls, and the controls are good. They work very well. I don't have any complaints with them. Got nothing to comment on that. And then the graphics and visuals, and the first thing I'm going to say is I really enjoy the designs. I really love all the character costumes. I think they're awesome. But then they take it to another level because you get a bunch of palette swaps for them, and it really can add just a completely different level to some of the costumes. There were some where I was like, it's not that cool, but then you get a certain palette for it and it looks way better. I think they knocked it out of the park with all the different costumes. I do hate that there is a monetization to some of the costumes, but to a lot of them, and the palette swaps, there isn't. You can get that with in-game currency, and you get plenty of in-game currency. I also think the enemy designs are fantastic. They really fit with the different stages of what's going on. I really just think they capture the Hydra vibe and just the Hell vibe that starts to go on with the Apocalypse. To put it simply, I think all the design is really good. Graphically, however, it's not the strongest game I've ever seen. I think the world and the set pieces all look fantastic graphically. They put a lot of detail into that. But the characters are not hyper-realistic, but they're also not super cartoony looking. So they hit this kind of weird gap, and it'll be interesting to see how the game ages. But then there are plenty of other graphical glitches, and unfortunately they're just kind of weird. None of them are necessarily destructive, but they're very noticeable and distracting. Like any floppy clothing, any fabric that's supposed to be loose and blowing in the wind will do some really weird shit and just whip around the entire screen sometimes. It gets super awkward looking. And like I said, it ends up being very distracting. I also had a really weird situation where I used a move and like the color of my game didn't go back to normal. It was all this weirdly green tinted stuff, like everything had a tint of green all of a sudden. It was strange looking, and it again was very distracting. I mean, none of it was horrible, but overall visually this game could have some work done on it. And then last but not least, let's get into the other glitches I ran into. I ran into some clipping issues. Enemies falling through the floor. Some of them, they fell through the floor because I used a knockback move and they died. And then I had another one where he fell through the floor and I couldn't hit him anymore. And it's problematic because he had an in-game card, an in-mission card that I really needed. So I had to restart that encounter, which was kind of a pain in the ass. Also, the camera in this game does some really weird stuff. It recovers before it's your turn, but it'll do some weird shit where it clips under the map and just zooms in way too far. There was also a weird glitch where a guy was just kind of like repeatedly going back and forth, but like floating back and forth, not like walking back and forth. There were plenty of weird glitches, none of them game breaking, fortunately, or at least none that I ran into. When those happen, they are distracting nonetheless, and they do kind of knock the overall quality. Okay, so to wrap this up, I really enjoyed this game. Just plain and simple. I had a really good time with this. I have not always loved every turn-based strategy game I've played. I didn't jump on this right away because I was a little, who knows how it's going to be. But I regret that. I fully enjoyed this game. I think it was fully worth my money. I fully recommend this game. I had a really fun time with it. This was an amazing game. It came out December of last year and should absolutely be played, in my opinion. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me who's your favorite character in The Runaways? Yeah, the Marvel team, The Runaways. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.